know, one of the recurring things that we have here on Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains are stories about Crazy Jake. Everybody has one. Well, Larry is no exception. We're going to find out about his story on Crazy Jake. Larry!
You know, my first meeting with Crazy Jake had kind of a punchline to the end of it. And in order to explain that punchline, I've got to give you a little background. This is about 1978. And I had formed a reenactment cavalry unit. There were already 5 Yankee cavalry outfits in the state, and none of them were doing reenacting, so I formed the 7th Confederate States Cavalry because you had to have opposition. And I was pretty well known by the time I met Jake for the first time, and I'd also found the whiskey, the Canadian Club whiskey they buried in the Superstitions. And I run around town in my Jeep with an aerial that was about 10 feet tall with a little Confederate banner flying off of it, and I always wore a Confederate cappy. Well, this particular time, Tom Collenborn and I were out in the Superstition Mountains on a horseback ride, and we were up on top of Bluff Springs Mountain. And while we were up there, there was some dynamite going on in the Superstitions. And later on, after we got out, Tom wanted me to go with him and to the Superstition Inn to Jake's bar. He said, Crazy Jake usually hangs out there in the evening. So we went out there, and Tom was going to ask about the dynamiting. And we sat there for half an hour just listening to Jake expound on things. And I thought, well, you know, Tom's never going to ask him. So my politically incorrect self, I just kind of blurted it out. And I said, you know, Jake, Tom and I were up on Bluff Springs Mountain today, and there was some dynamite going on. Was that you? Oh, man, you'd have think I'd hit him upside the head with a 2x4. And because the Forest Service didn't like this stuff going on at all. And he went off on a tangent, and I can't remember everything he said, but he finally ended up saying something about weirdos at Apache Junction. And I said, well, what's your idea of a weirdo? And he says, anybody would come in here and talk to me in a Confederate hat. That was the end of that story. But in the 80s, he ended up in a doctor's ranch down in Chandler or somewhere in that area, and had a bunch of horses. And I didn't know that it wasn't his place or they weren't his horses, but he had a deal to rent them. And for our reenacting, I was renting horses from everybody. I started with Bill Booth, which goes way back, and Ron Feldman. I rented horses from them. Bill Crater, Archie Johnson, you name it, I've rented horses from him, even on the other side of town, places I can't remember. But Jake was renting horses, and when we had a local parade and needed 2 or 3 horses, I'd call him on the phone, and he'd have them delivered to my place. But when we went to Picacho Pass, I needed as many as 10 horses, and I had a trailer that if you put them in there, nose to tail, you could put 10 horses in this trailer. So we went, rented them, picked them up at the ranch, went on to Picacho Pass. That particular year, there were 5,000 people sitting on the hillside while we done the reenactment of Picacho Pass. And I narrated the whole thing and stuff. And I had my booklet on Apache Pass, Picacho Pass, Arizona Civil War story. And I sold a lot of books that day. And I literally had a roll of cash in my pocket that would choke a horse. And so when we got the horses back to the ranch, I went in to pay him up. And as soon as I walked through the door, he was quite a ways across the room. He came out of the drawer with his hand with a 1911 .45 Army pistol and laid it on the desk, pointing in my direction, and pulled his hand away.
So he pointed a gun at you. What'd you do?
And I walked up to the desk, and it was right up against it. And he quoted the price, and I pulled out this roll of bills, and he says, Hedrick, you ought to know better than to flash a roll of bills like that again around me. And I said, Jake, I got 10 guys outside with 2 pistols each. And I took my finger and I spun the gun around pointing in his direction. I said, what do you think you're gonna do? And he just busted out laughing. And we had a good laugh. I know he liked to intimidate people, but this guy had a sense of humor. And I didn't find him near as intimidating as a lot of people say. And that's my story of Jacob, Crazy Jake.
Straight from our own Larry Hedrick and his stories about Crazy Jake. Crazy Jake, one of the obvious mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.